My name is Kelsey Haley. This is a review of the movie Hotel Rwanda. This film was produced in 2004. It was directed by Terry George. The screenwriters were Terry George and Keir Pearson. The main actors were Don Cheadle and Sophie Okonedo. Going into the film, I expected it to be a boring documentary, but this movie was much more. I didn't really have any background of this massacre, and this film completely shocked me. This film was a great account of something terrible in history that many people of the time and today do not consider to be a big deal. In Hotel Rwanda, there were two groups of people under the rule of one kingdom. The two groups were the Tutsi and the Hutu. The only difference between the two was something as simple as how wide their noses were. The king was Hutu, and in the beginning of the movie, he was overthrown and killed by the Tutsi. After the overthrow of the king, the kingdom completely fell apart. Tutsi were raiding homes in the middle of the night, killing men, women, and children with machetes and setting their homes on fire. The main character of the movie, Paul, was a manager at a hotel called Hotel O'Mill Caslin. This was a high-end resort that honored itself by how peaceful it was. After coming home from work and finding his neighborhood destroyed and his family and neighbors hiding for their lives in a room in their house, he loaded them up in the hotel's bus and brought them back to the hotel. When they arrived at the hotel, they were met by Hutu warriors. Paul was Hutu, but his wife and neighbors were not. Paul had to bribe the Hutu warriors to not kill them and to let them go into the hotel. Soon after this, people started flooding into the hotel seeking refuge. The visitors that were staying at the hotel for travel wanted to leave as soon as possible. By this time, United Nations soldiers had stepped in to be peacekeepers, but made sure that people understood they were not peacemakers. People continued to flood the hotel in hopes of a safe place. Paul tried his best to take care of the hotel and his family. Paul did not want to fight. He saw no difference between the Hutu and Tutsi, and this angered many. When Paul had to go buy more food for the hotel from a local Hutu, he was asked if he wanted to help fight. When Paul did not answer the question, he was told to take the river road because it was clear, only to find that dead bodies covered the roads for miles. After all the white people being allowed to leave the country, the UN pulling out because they saw the Hutu and Tutsi as dirt, several attacks on the hotel, some people staying in the hotel were granted visas after begging and pleading their rich white friends. When the convoy led by the UN made its way to the airport, they were ambushed by Tutsi and forced back to the hotel. Shortly after, their water was cut off by outsiders, and they were forced to make one final attempt out to the airport. This convoy was successful, even though they had to drive in the middle of the war zone. At the place where they loaded the bus to leave the country, Paul and his family found his wife's niece and nephew. They had been looking for them throughout the entire movie. This film ends when Paul's entire family is holding hands and walking to the bus. The Tutsi eventually take over the country and push all the Hutu to the Congo. Paul and his family moved to Belgium. They were lucky. Hundreds of thousands were not. This film was very descriptive and emotional. At times it was hard to watch, but made an accurate representation of what these events were actually like. When Paul stays at the hotel after letting his family go to what he thought was safety, I realized just how important he was in the Civil War. He chose risking his life to save others over safety. My values and beliefs tell me that Paul is a selfless and good man. The UN soldiers were strictly peacekeepers, but there was no peace to keep. If the colonel had disobeyed orders and told his men to shoot, he would have been protecting his friends' lives and should have done so. Racism played a big part on how these events were played out. No other forces would help their people because they were seen as dirt. A U.S. helicopter had been shot down in Somalia a year before, and the soldiers had been dragged through the streets. Even though it would have been unpopular if U.S. soldiers had come to help, it needed to be done. Rwanda now houses around 100,000 prisoners that are accused of committing acts of genocide. An admission of guilt should be required through each step in each trial. If people say it was for self-defense, they should spend less time in jail. The commander and leaders should receive life in prison because they are at fault. They are more at fault for instigating violence. The trial should be held at an international level. This way, there would be judges and juries that have a non-biased viewpoint. I see Paul as someone who would have operated like Jesus. Throughout the entire movie, he remained selfless and unbiased, depending on if you were Hutu or Tutsi. This was an amazing film that accurately depicted a horrible genocide in our recent history. It is devastating to know how big of a part race and status played in the events of this war, and how many people were killed because of something as simple as the size of your nose.